Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Monday, March 16th. So, yeah, we'll scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent chart here. Starting a little later than what I said I was going to start on, just because I thought I had scheduled it for 30 minutes past the hour instead of it on the hour, which honestly on YouTube you probably should always schedule it for on the hour. But anyways, so I was just happily doing little other things while waiting for the time I thought I was due to approach. Mostly finishing up assembling yet another bookshelf piece of furniture. These are the cheapest pieces of bookshelf furniture ever. I have two more of those and then I will be done, as far as I can tell, as far as assembling furniture goes. At least for the foreseeable future. There are certainly scenarios where if a lot of things go together well, I might get some new furniture and have to assemble it, but in the next few years, but only really if things go really well, and frankly some of it has to do with just getting rid of other furniture that I don't want. We have a Japanese titled game making it into the top 100, which that is an extreme rarity as far as what people are playing, although 80-second space really only requires 29,000 people to play it at within 24 hours, which really goes to show just how easy it is to potentially for a day or two have a launch of a game and make it into the top 100. Now, does the top 100 actually help you any? As far as I can tell, probably not. I don't think it triggers anything specifically as far as the Steam front page, which would be the much more important and useful thing to be on. Very few people are looking at this chart from SteamDB or the Steam version of this chart, which is a little bit busier visually. People still playing Mugenics, but I think the numbers are going to settle. I don't think it's going to just fall off the top 100 anytime soon, but I think it probably will settle fairly easily. And honestly, by the time you get to something like Marathon, with 62,000 people playing it in 24 hours, you have to just start to assume that there's usually a lot of bots showing up in games like that. Or there's just a lot of people necessary for a game like that to even succeed and keep on going, whereas a single player game really can have 10,000 people play it in its launch window and then grow an audience later on, potentially. At least that was in the past. Maybe it's not the case anymore. One thing I also am feeling like I can editorialize a little bit here is looking at the visuals for Marathon and how different it is really makes me think that it is an example of how creatively bankrupt these looter shooter games are. And what I specifically mean when I say that is all of the gameplay mechanics, all of the ideas, all of the sound, basically everything are so baked in that there's just nothing creative you can do to change any of those elements, that the only thing you can change is the visuals. And so Marathon is visually very creative in the sense that it's different than what we've seen before, but it doesn't feel like it really matters too much, because a new skin on the same old game I don't think helps that much. I think we are in deep conflict between what upper managements of companies want, which is games of services that they can charge infinite amount of monies for, and what gamers want, which is games they can play forever and not have to pay forever to play. And that there is just a deep conflict there. Plus the gamers want games to be good, and I'm not good and fun, and I'm not sure looter shooters in general are good or fun. I am thinking of making a new project, particularly on my GitHub, where I'm going to put all these monkey scripts up. That way they'll be all in one place to work with, and I might even be able to convince some trusted people to constantly update my scripts. Yeah, inherently the thing there, since the scripts are really just for my own personal use, you would need to find some way to compensate the people working on the scripts for me, and yeah, normally that would be in a monetary way that would mean money, and that's just not something I really could afford. However, GitHub does have its little reward system for being active, getting pull requests submitted and approved, and comments and things like that. So I think maybe the compensation might be that if I find the right people, they might be able to build up their GitHub account and look like they're doing a lot more. That will only really trick really stupid people, but there are some really stupid people out there that do look at people's GitHub accounts and look for the amount of activity. The problem with that, though, is that the GitHub activity could mean that you're adding thousands of lines of useless code, pointless code, that got approved regardless, or that you're just fixing tiny little bugs, or even introducing bugs that got approved. It doesn't speak at all to the quality of the code, the efficiency of the code, the quality of your own skill, and lines of code. Hiring by the number of lines of code somebody submits is also incredibly misleading, in that a bad programmer very possibly could do 5 times as many lines of code to accomplish the same thing that a good programmer would do in 1 line of code. But yeah, for my purposes, what I'm thinking here is this might have more of a consistent, constant updating and improving, whereas SteamDB here has added some extra elements, and because of these extra elements, they are now taking up the top of the screen here. Let's look at the most wishlisted games. So what have I been doing otherwise? I've been working on my second generation Tablo, TABLO. It is an over-the-air DVR that was bought out by a different company, and I can't really recommend it. Now, HD Home Runner is probably your better bet as far as what to get, and frankly, in a few years, with the changes of the over-the-air signals, HD Home Runner is probably going to be one of the few devices you would have to get just to receive the ATSC 3 signals in the United States, at least. But yeah, I basically have had it unplugged since 2023 and wasn't using it, so I plugged it back in, and I'm trying to do something more with it. Probably it's going to be just getting a bunch of over-the-air old movies that are slightly okay, but not great enough that you really need a DVD or a Blu-ray or a 4K disc for over-the-air TV. I have an amazing amount of channels. It's over 100 channels that I can receive in my area, which is just a ridiculous amount of channels, but there isn't much on any of them except for really, really old stuff. So if you like things like Gilligan's Island or Green Acres, things like that, that might work for you. But yeah, over-the-air TV is for the cheapest and the oldest of people possible. But there is occasionally some things there too that will just not end up on streaming services or would be buried by streaming services. I'm also gonna give it more of a attempt to use a service called Real Good instead of a service called Just Watch, which is more of a tracking of what movies and where to stream them, and what TV and where to stream them. Barely any real difference between Real Good and Just Watch, other than Real Good seems to have maybe a slightly better system to share and like friend people. As far as what I'm watching, I want to potentially make a bigger, longer checklist of things that I've seen, since I've seen so much, and things that I want to see, of which there's not that much, which is why a lot of what I've done over the past couple days, let's look at the 7-day game, has been watching the first 16 episodes or so of Supernatural, which that's still season 1 of a 15 season series. Definitely I'm looking at it from the perspective of what should they have done to make it a much more manageable series and a better series. Basically, the first 6 episodes of Supernatural introduce the idea that they're going to be fighting like modern American myths, Bloody Mary, the Hook Man, things like that, and then Wendigos. But yeah, by the end of the 6th episode, I think they realized they were out of ideas there. They can every now and then introduce a interesting character like a Tolva, but it is just going to get really weird if they're not shooting a bunch of zombies or vampires or demons. And we know, well, I know everything about Supernatural pretty much. That's not true, but we know they go heavy into the demons pretty much at the end of the 5th season, and that's when the show really starts, is in the 5th season. And these are incredibly long CW seasons, so it's like 26 episodes or more a season, when realistically 12 episodes would have been right. They were definitely getting their footing in the first season, but I think what they screwed up with in particular is the father character was just not signed into a pay or play contract that was good enough, apparently, or he wasn't just a good enough actor, and so the surrogate father character, Bobby, is just like way better in retrospect from Supernatural. So if they could have had Bobby be the surrogate father character to start with, that would have been somewhat helpful. And early on they try to tease the idea that the 2 brothers, the Winchester boys, are like players, and that they have all these kinds of relationships and can get dates like crazy, but it's never actually very well reflected uh, in what is actually shown. So it more than likely would have been better if the Meg character was combined with the Jess character. Jess is like the girlfriend of one of the brothers and dies like in the same episode you meet her, which they fridge the brother's mother in the past, basically killing her without giving her any personality, which really hurts when they go back 10 seasons later and start to give her a lot more personality and backstory. And then they also, in basically the same episode, fridge the girlfriend 20 years later of one of the brothers. That's Jess. So, what I would have certainly done in retrospect, and I'm having this just like thought, I'll never act on it, but of like retelling Supernatural, doing an abridged of Supernatural where you'd have to do it like animated or all new actors, certainly, but I would have it be you start with Meg being the girlfriend, and Meg is just weirdly gung-ho to go on the ride on the road trip and hunt monsters with Sam. And she's just one of the guys. And inherently, we know by the end of Supernatural, it's like 4 people, if not usually 5 or 6 people, that are really needed in the mix to make the balance of characters work. Perhaps that's just because the brothers over the seasons become unified so much that they become only one character, but yeah. Castiel, in particular the Angel, needed to be introduced a lot earlier. It's weird that they actually introduce a Grim Reaper far earlier than Castiel shows up. And in the episode that they do introduce the Grim Reaper, that might have been a good episode instead to have introduced Castiel, even if the episode went almost exactly the same, and then the person who thought they were faith healing became possessed by an angel in the form of Castiel. Another thing that they and see, it's pretty easy to know what to rewrite in the early seasons. It's just the things that they eventually did fix in the later seasons. They had in the later seasons this Men of Letters bunker that seemed to magically always be close enough to where the action was happening that they no longer needed to stay in hotels and use those as sets. I think it would make a lot more sense if in the early seasons they just established that there was a collection of hunters, and the hunters always had room 13s inside of hotels. That maybe they had magical keys, maybe that made a room 13 be visible, where it's protected and warded and invisible to normal people. Or maybe there just always is a room 13 and people just walk right past it. And inside those room 13s, you could say that they were all built to the exact same specs by maybe H.H. Holmes himself, notorious serial killer. And then you could put a funny twist on that and say that actually he was a monster hunter and all the people he killed were actually monsters, which would be insulting to the reality, but I don't think too many people would really complain about that. So yeah, establish why every set can be reused a lot more often, which is a big problem throughout the entire series of Supernaturals, that sets just are not that reusable, and they're blowing the budget by not having any reoccurring locations. Maybe you just start it smaller. You establish the idea that monsters are numerous and that there potentially are going to be several Bloody Marys, several Hookmen, Woman in White, things like that. But yeah, if they weren't going to have hotel rooms, they could have had like a mobile home that they were dragging around, but that's less convenient and less realistic. But yeah, establish Meg, have a whole romance for the first season on Meg, establish that the father is missing the whole time and probably dead, and then at the end of the first season have Meg do a fake out where she fakes her own death, and then have a whole season of no Meg and dealing with no Meg for her to return as the bad guy at the end of the second season. The father, I think you probably find out that he's dead very quickly, or you just have him around but injured, which would also make a lot of sense, that he's coordinating things just like Bobby did, but he's too old and too injured to go anywhere other than that. Also would have the father character be able to show up in every single episode by doing research. You could certainly turn him closer to like a Giles character in Buffy, which I heard, by the way, the Buffy remake is not going to happen. Weirdly, they also said that they are, if they get enough supporters, which feels like it's a almost Kickstarter type thing, they may be doing a animated Firefly continuation sequel series, which at first I hadn't heard that was going to be animated, so I thought that it was going to be a live action thing, and I was like, oh, that's going to be terrible. Those actors are so old now. But, you know, with AI deepfake voicing and animation, yeah, you could do a new Firefly series. The real question there is who's doing the writing, and do they have any chance of being good at writing any stories there, or is it just going to be a sequel with terrible episodes? Firefly in particular would be an interesting kind of soft reboot, because it has been left alone just due to lack of funding, whereas Star Trek and Star Wars have not been left alone, and their soft reboots and continuations have just gotten worse and weirder. Certainly the way Firefly goes may be very much an indication on how any new Babylon 5 type project might go. Although at this case, you couldn't even really do an animated Babylon 5 type project with any of the actors, because there's more actors who are dead from Babylon 5 than there are that are alive, I believe. They're so old. So it would be better just to do a full hard reboot with all new actors. But yeah, I'm up to episode 16 in Supernatural. Really gonna be a huge time suck and waste of time, I know, but yeah, there is basically, in my mind, 3 arcs of Supernatural. The first 5 years, first 5 seasons, the second 5 seasons, and the third 5 seasons. And the last 5 seasons are over the top. The first 5 seasons are under interesting, because there's basically a point at the end of the 5 seasons that show is really over, and really you're just being told a completely different show, and the whole premise and setup of the first 5 seasons is pretty much resolved at the end of the first 5 seasons. And the greatness of the show is really in that it is kind of a monster of a week show where you can, for the most part, in many of the early seasons, ignore all the bad and only really remember the good, which makes it a great candidate for an abridged telling. Here's a game based on Into the Badlands. That was a show I liked, just for its wire fu, kung fu action-y, and a pretty good story, but on the wrong TV channel, or extended cable channel, and coming out at a time when cable and TV was dying. Yeah. If you did something like Into the Badlands now on something like Apple TV or Netflix, probably would have done a lot better. There are some other things in Supernatural that they fixed. For instance, they had the other brother, Dean, weirdly have gadgets and technology, and so he's got like EMF detectors, and it's just like that really doesn't work, and so they dropped that pretty quickly. They didn't really know what the practical effects and special effects were going to be, so the way certain ghosts die, the way certain monsters die, is all very much them experimenting with effects until they really locked it down to a much smaller subset of effects that are done really nicely. The show, I think, consistently throughout all 15 seasons is a little too dark, as far as visually dark. And so whenever you do have an occasional scene outside, it is shockingly bright and colorful. Yeah, they also later on make too big of a deal around things like the car or the necklace that Dean wears, when clearly those were just props that they had picked out. Yeah. And that's not even getting into the later seasons issues of just how the two actors, I think, probably got tired of working with each other for so long, which that really highlights the problem of CW having nothing else really successful, just handing over bundles of cash to the actors to keep them doing something. Whereas in most cases it would have made a lot more sense to end the show after 5 seasons. And the sequel series, The Winchesters, they only went for like 1 season. Really didn't do anything special. And that's why it only went 1 season. Yeah. Inherently, they really just milked out all the quality out of a series like that. Yeah, I suppose it's not too different from like Stargate SG-1, where that's a show that just kept going and kept going. And that's the problem with most sci-fi shows in particular, is that they would have rabid fan bases that would keep shows going, because if you don't keep the shows going, you're not going to get a replacement. But I would say the Stargate series at least tried a lot harder with Atlantis. Even now there's Stargate stuff that they're trying to work on and reboots, but they tried, I think, with at least Atlantis and I think one other show where sequel shows were coming out in parallel to still making episodes from SG-1, with whole new crews and whole new sets of people, and yeah, it didn't really go as long, but I think the sequel shows did manage to get at least 3 or 4 seasons out of them. And maybe that is just kind of the diminished returns you have to expect from spin-off shows. Which, yeah, I guess they were technically spin-off shows, not sequel shows. Also watched Young Sherlock episode 1 on Prime Video. Absolute garbage. Like, increasingly, every single new iteration of Sherlock Holmes grows further and further away from what Sherlock Holmes was established as a person, and there's just this willing misunderstanding of the character, particularly that he was a massive fighter and that he could fight, and that he was just like action based in any way, when Sherlock Holmes stories are the antithesis of that. But yeah, there's just like no murder in the entire first episode until like the last 5 seconds of Young Sherlock, which means you have a murder mystery type character with no murder to solve. He does have a case to solve. Does he solve it particularly wisely? No. Does he actually even solve it? Not really. But he does meet Moriarty, and they're going to be new best friends. And yeah, it's just like the example of the Holmes estate still having any claim to Sherlock Holmes has really just proven that Sherlock Holmes copyright in general is broken, because there has not been a single good example of Sherlock Holmes that has been licensed since Arthur Conan Doyle passed. And it would have been much better for society for every single bit of Sherlock Holmes to either have already been in public domain or entered public domain when Arthur Conan Doyle passed. Now, I will say I like the Netflix Emma Holmes, or Enola Holmes, but I mean, that's just a totally made up character. So, yeah, there's nothing Sherlock Holmes to really compare there to say one thing or the other. And the only other Sherlock Holmes that really I think was close to being good is probably House MD, where he's not really Sherlock Holmes as a character, but he is doing somewhat of a decent job of doing the deductive reasoning, or implying that he's doing the deductive reasoning that would be in a actual Sherlock Holmes story. I've read all the Sherlock Holmes stories, so I'm fairly familiar with them, although it was a very long time ago. And honestly, I don't know if I have the attention span to really read them again. But yeah, anytime you see Sherlock Holmes doing anything action-y, that's not Sherlock Holmes at that point. And then, of course, the thing that follows in a lot of the Sherlock Holmes shows and movies is that the mystery is just completely unsolvable. Although, in fairness, I feel like some of the Sherlock Holmes books were also completely unsolvable. That you just were not given enough information to be able to solve them. I suppose at some level, if Sherlock Holmes stories were being released in the way they were originally released, as just penny novels, with like one chapter being released per week, then maybe you could have a better story that way. But in the modern equivalent of that would be that there would be one murder mystery at the beginning of a series, and by the end of that season you would solve that one murder, which is almost never. I don't think I can think of a single example of a Sherlock Holmes story TV show being like that. Am I watching anything else? I'm not watching the Oscars or any of the movies nominated for the Oscars. Inherently, I am thinking more about what next year will look like as far as my movie watching, and like I'm giving thoughts to having movie nights, but I really wasn't ever really thinking that it would be watching like the Oscar nominated movies or even movies that inherently came out in that same year, because then the movie night concept would involve going to a theater and paying a high premium to watch most of those movies, or renting them or buying them at a high price brand new. At some point, if I was going to have a movie club that was looking at all the Oscar nominated movies, we'd have to probably collect high amounts of dues just to cover the cost of the movies. But in fairness, I also just don't think it's worth watching all the Oscar nominated movies or talking about Oscar nominated movies. Those are the biggest, most Hollywood movies out there that are usually the most boring and already known about movies anyways. So, yeah. Well, it might potentially get me views on some kind of spin-off YouTube channel, I just don't really think I'd want to watch the Oscars. Inherently, I prefer popular votes. Still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, trying to catch up more there. And still playing Magica Magica Memento Mori. Nothing really new happening there. But yeah, I far prefer popular votes, and it is also worth pointing out that the Oscars have notoriously been underrepresenting foreign films in general, but particularly Asian, Eastern anime type films. There's barely one animation category. It's usually there so that Disney can get nominated, although in the last 4 years Disney has not actually won in the animation category, but it's usually somebody else that gets nominated, when some other Western CGI animator, more than likely. But yeah, with the exception of Ghibli movies, which I think only a couple of those have won, there's never been an anime movie that has won. I'm not sure that there have been even any that have been nominated. But that's not just anime, that's also foreign movies in general are not getting nominations. And really, it's only this year that the Oscar voting committee has been given a honor system to actually watch the movies that they vote on, whereas there's no way of really enforcing that they've set up. But in the past, it was pretty much acceptable to simply vote on something because you were bribed with something, or because you've just heard the name of the movie. So it becomes worse than a popularity vote. It becomes a just notoriety vote. The things that do win for the reasons they win in most of these shows, like the Oscars, often make very little sense. Too. So yeah, suppose what one could do is look at what has come out in the last 12 months before the Oscars and do their own kind of movie reviews. But in my case in particular, it's still most just like the games I cover. I tend to cover and watch movies that are fairly older, and so it doesn't, particularly in the movies case, it doesn't really make any sense to say let's celebrate this movie just because it came out this year when it's potentially just as good of a movie next year, or the year after that, or 10 years after that. So probably would be better suited in something like a tier list or something as far as movies go. But also it would need to like break things down in categories a lot more, which, much like the video game awards, yeah, I really would like to see multiple movies getting awards for being very good instead of just having a numbered first, second, third type system for movies. Because yeah, it's pretty ridiculous to try and compare one thing versus another when they're so drastically different things. What I haven't been doing also is playing any video games. Between resting, watching way too much streaming, maybe doing some more Sudokus, also stabbed my fingers in with a screwdriver, so that hurts. While I was changing out the bottoms of some chairs to have felt pads instead of metal pads on them, so they won't scratch up the floor. I was using a screwdriver to try and pry off the metal pads when I should have been using a chisel and just being a lot more careful, and I slipped and stabbed myself, which it's not a deep stab, but it's right in the split between two fingers, and it's where it's just gonna get rubbed and irritated a lot. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of stuff other than playing video games, which, yeah, that's only gonna slow me down more. I managed to also knock out my plug to my monitor, and that took some time diagnosing too. One of my monitors was just not getting signal because I knocked the HDMI plug loose. And yeah, I'm still probably jumping into doing some of those cracking the cryptic Sudokus that are way too long, and I can't really solve too many of them. I get bored. Looks like we've got yet another adult-themed game just being put right on the front page, which I would think this part featured and recommended would be somewhat curated by YouTube, but I mean by Steam, but maybe not. I am increasingly thinking about more multiplayer games. There is just that possibility that I would occasionally do that with the new collab features on on YouTube in particular, there's a possibility that some kind of more multiplayer focused co-op game would be on the table for me to actually play it, but I don't know. It's going to inherently have to come down to what kind of personality am I going to be in that kind of playthrough? What kind of personality is everyone else going to be? I definitely have seen some Minecraft collab people where it's people just being very ADHD and running around or talking over each other, and yeah, I don't know really how to merge my calm, critical, complete concept that I do in my pre-recorded videos with a co-op game. Yeah. But yeah. Let's check out this Tingy tower defense and see how it's doing. But yeah. There is a possibility there. Of course, the real danger there is I would buy even like one relatively new co-op game for $40 to $60, and it's just money getting flushed down the toilet, and I already am flushing down way too much money down the toilet for other reasons. Yeah. Probably should keep a diary on just what days I don't end up buying something on Amazon. Yeah, at this rate. Because honestly, it feels like almost every single day there's something. But yeah, part of the problem there too is that there are definitely people who take sadistic pleasure, frankly, on telling me in particular, but I think it's a lot of people, to never spend any money on anything ever. It's just never shop, never buy anything. And there are people who just aren't living in a kind of realistic lifestyle. They're just living in a hyper minimalistic lifestyle where all their money, if they have any, is just going to groceries. And a lot of times it's because people don't have the money, but I think more often than not it's probably people that could afford to have more and live a nicer lifestyle but are just opting not to because they've built it into their personality to deprive themselves and expect everyone else to deprive themselves. The type of people that are going to end up having like tons of cash in their bank account when they die. This one still doing very good, and certainly it's a big difference between like what you can afford and what you can't afford for people, and whether you have family that you have to take care of or not. Munchkin here is 40% with 20 user reviews. Wonder if that's because there's just nobody playing it, or maybe it's because there's another $16 worth of DLC. So even if you got this, you don't have all of it. Yeah. Munchkin originally was a board game, or card game, tabletop game. I'm horribly disappointed in this game. It does not feel like the real Munchkin I used to play with friends and family. In a game where undermining other players to get ahead in local game mode, the AI will not take those actions against other AI players, only the player herself. Some cards that should give an option to pick a side don't, which is stupid, especially when the card says choose a side. Rough edges and nothing that's lowering the fun itself. So yeah. Unfortunately, it does seem like there's just a history of this kind of experience where the digital version of these kinds of games are not as good as the real world version, which maybe there is an almost intentional aspect to that, where they make the digital versions of these types of games worse, so you buy the more overpriced cardboard versions of that. But yeah, certainly if I'm giving thoughts to having game nights, but if it was going to be any kind of physical games, I have very, very few physical games, so it would be a lot of people bringing their own games, or again, back to a weird due system, which I don't think people really would want to fund into. And yeah, it would be pretty silly if I started to line my shelves with board games. Frankly, the whole idea of having a games night still kind of terrifies me, because if it's video games and I have like a Steam Deck out, it terrifies me that some jerk somewhere is just going to grab the Steam Deck and walk out of my house with it and just rob me blind. Yeah, I know I'm dealing with adults here, but don't pretend for a second that there isn't at least a percentage of adults that would do something like that, that they would just grab something, and or if not steal something, they would just break something, trip into a TV and break a monitor, things like that. So yeah, you have to put a lot of hope and faith into people and really trust the people. Otherwise, you're opening yourself up for a potential disaster. Now, this is funny. Something about the way my visuals are being changed here has blocked a lot of games. Potentially games that maybe I already own. But yeah, a EA, or no, Square Enix in this case, publisher sale. It's going to heavily push you down the realm of getting Final Fantasy games. Which certainly, if money was no object, then I could just catch up and have all the Final Fantasy games, even if I'm not going to really play them. Though it's kind of hard to make the argument to do that at the moment, as I just don't see anybody in my Steam family right now having enough time to want to play a lot of these games. Chrono Trigger would be one to consider, and Paranormal Sight may interest me. Maybe this little goody two-shoes might interest me. This is just scrolling all over the place. Nier Replicant. A certain level, sure, but I need to play Nier Automata first. Yep. Yeah, and while we're still doing this warm-up section, which I don't think I really defined as a warm-up section, also have to mention that I, at this point, am going to have to get rid of my dehumidifier and probably just throw it away, but I'll see if somebody wants it for parts, because it, as far as I can tell, developed a leak and leaked out some refrigerant, which you leak out refrigerant, then the coils from the bottom up will start freezing up. If the coils were dirty, all the coils would freeze up at the same time, It'd have to be particularly dirty, but it means my dehumidifier is useless, and now I'm just trying to see if I can tweak the settings in my air conditioner so that I don't need one at all, which, yeah, we'll see if that happens or not. Otherwise I'm going to end up buying a new dehumidifier, which would be an extra expense. Just everything seems to be breaking just about at the same time, which, yeah, doesn't that always happen? Yeah, still don't have any refurbed Steam Decks. Don't expect to see any for a while. We are seeing a slight split in what people are playing on the Steam Deck versus some of the games coming out. Marathon in particular, I don't think is probably playable on the Steam Deck, and that's why it's not jumped up. But Eugenics is still particularly high. Resident Evil Requiem is still particularly high. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything else particularly to talk about. Esoteric Ebb is staying strong on the Steam Deck. Hello Kitty Adventure Island has stayed particularly strong on the Steam Deck. Yep. Digimon has stayed particularly strong. Yeah. It'll be an interesting example, certainly, as far as Digimon being in the 78th spot on Steam Deck games being played, and then when the next bit of DLC comes out for Digimon, whether that next bit of DLC will bump it up. I imagine DLC probably doesn't bump it up. It probably just helps slow down the number of people who might have left a game, or brings back people who have slowed down on playing the game but haven't fully abandoned it yet. If it does anything else at all, it might be that DLC actually does almost nothing. But yeah, I don't know of a lot of examples of somebody getting DLC for a game and then the game becomes super popular. The only time you have something like that is usually when it is player versus player multiplayer game and they have updated the game for everybody for free. Of course, there's plenty of examples of people doing that, and that then people are not happy with the updates and the numbers drop instead of going up. In fact, there's almost certainly way more examples of people getting upset with change versus people being happy with change. Let's move on to video game news now. That's an hour worth of warm-up. So we're going to go through Video Games Chronicle, and I can say I did not have to manually open up the tabs today. That advertisement that they had pinned to the #1 spot of the page has gone away. So yeah, that problem fixed itself just by me ignoring it long enough, which, yeah, yay for that. So our first Video Games Chronicle article here sounds particularly angry when new game you don't care about is announced. Quote, shut the F up, no one cares. The next Overwatch director says. Jeff Kaplan says he ignores anyone moaning about games they never plan on playing. So we have continued reactions from Jeff Kaplan, probably all from that same podcast, and how he said this quote probably was softer than how it reads, because usually when you read something, you read it in the worst light possible. But certainly it does also speak, I think, way much more about Jeff Kaplan being I want to say prick, but there's a more intelligent way to describe it. Self-deluder, somebody who has already established their perception on reality that is not really within the realm of reality. Self-gaslighter might be a good term too, because he is really establishing here that he knows what's in the hearts and minds of everybody who might complain about his game. I don't know if anybody has really even complained about his game yet, but he definitely seems like he's got a straw man in his mind, and that is every single person who might say anything negative whatsoever. And his response to tell him to shut up is definitely not encouraging open discourse. It's not encouraging a transfer and trade of ideas and thoughts. It's not going to help Jeff Kaplan learn anything or grow, nor is it going to help Jeff Kaplan teach anything and let the potential people who might be complaining about the announcement of his new games learn or grow. It is generally the opinion, my opinion, that you should just not respond to negativity online ever. But yeah, all he really needed to do is announce his new game here and not create a headline like this, because really it just tells me that this person is probably so self-gaslit that if that's how they feel publicly and that's what they're willing to say publicly, they're probably worse in private, which means anytime anybody working for him brings up an issue, he's probably going to just ignore it or gaslight himself into the belief that it's not really a problem. Locking yourself down, shutting yourself off to criticism is a great way to not grow. And at a certain level, if you're artistic, if you have an artistic vision and you don't care about making money and you just want to make the art that you want to make, fine. Lock yourself off to criticism. Maybe don't attack people who potentially might have bought your game before it's even out. But yeah, if you just want to be an starving artist, be a starving artist. Although, unfortunately, capitalism does kind of corrupt everything, and if you are running a business, you can't really be a starving artist and let your employees starve. Otherwise, you are also a jerk boss. But yeah, by headline alone, Jeff is saying something here, and I guess this isn't from the same podcast. This seems to be a clip from some kind of Twitch stream or something else. Yeah. Which, again, that probably gives a good example of somebody who really should not be in the position that they are speaking publicly at all. If you have such a terrible demeanor and you have failed to learn any media training, and you just don't have your focus on creating a positive feeling around your product so people might buy it more. Yeah, negativity very rarely sells, I would say, for video games in particular. It almost never sells. Moving on, as it passes 6 million sales, Capcom officially confirms that a Resident Evil Requiem is the fastest selling game. It also reiterated plans for extra content coming to the game in the future. Which, yeah, I would have assumed it was going to have some extra content, although in fairness, the Resident Evil 2 remake content is not particularly a lot. It's just costumes and stuff. They do seem to only really want to add story content to newer series, not remake series, which makes some sense too. They really shouldn't be adding extra story to a remake of a game. But yeah. In fairness, there was some negativity as far as people who spoil the game should die 1,000 deaths, or whatever the quote was, around Resident Evil. But I think that story probably got ignored and or taken as mostly a joke. And in fairness, I think maybe the general audience might be more willing to side with people who say games shouldn't be spoiled, unless people are actively going out to spoil themselves, at which point that's a very different type of consumer of video games that may very well not be an actual gamer. There almost certainly is a larger audience to be had if all video games embrace the idea of just letting let's plays or letting the experience happen without having to press any buttons at all. Yeah, I'm surprised there really has not been anything like that proposed yet. We're getting closer and closer AI assistants where the game will take over, but I mean, in 5 years there almost certainly will be one game where it's just you press start and it is just movie mode. You put the controller down and you watch the cutscenes and you watch pre-scripted gameplay of the non-cutscenes. Of course, for a horror game like Resident Evil Requiem, I don't know if you'd get too many more people willing to watch the game and not play it. If anything, I think it probably would become more scary if you're not in control shooting the gun. And then that does potentially bring out another thought as far as, could you do let's plays around horror games where you are minimally using the guns and weapons at all to make it even more horrific if it was just a dodge type experience instead of a shooting type experience in a game. Moving on, Bungie overcorrected. The distance gunfire can be heard in marathons, says it will dial it back later. A recent update made it easier to locate players from a distance. Okay, well, that's probably not the worst thing you could overcorrect on or do something. I heard Windows had a pretty awful bug in one of its latest updates. Definitely, I thought that might be the problem with my computer. Fortunately for me, it was just a case of the HDMI cord being loose, but yeah, it is increasingly dangerous just to update Windows at this point, and very scary that I might want to stream or record footage and then all of a sudden a Windows update might create a total brick of a system, which would be a really difficult thing to kind of recover from. Of course, I could buffer myself from those kinds of problems by just getting around to assembling and setting up my new computer and then having my old Windows computer as a backup. Of course, I need to get around to that, but I've been saying that for months. Let's see. Here we have a quote. People were just not ready for it. The Starfield composer says it will eventually be legendary. Ino Zur says it's just a matter of time before Bethesda game is appreciated more. At a certain level, I imagine there might be some truth to that, but it's probably very little truth to it. I think the chances of a Starfield 2 are extremely low, and without continuing the series. You can't like grow a nostalgia for a series, as it were. So yeah, and it is funny that the composer here is making that statement, but then I guess that in fairness, composers can say whatever they want, and it just doesn't really matter. Yeah, that's another thing about the Oscars, is just like original compositions for movies are in a weird place, and there's weird rules around what songs are just derivatives of other songs. In video games, I think it would be even more of a case that if you're trying to give out a award for original compositions, it's gonna either be a massive amount of ridiculous rules, or it's just gonna have to be a free-for-all. And again, I think if I was gonna make an award show, I'd probably just have a popular vote free-for-all and say, any game you think the music is great in, say yes to that, regardless of whether it's licensed music or whether it's derivative works. If a Mario game still has some banger hits because the Mario theme is a banger hit to you, then who am I to tell you otherwise? But yeah, no, generally I don't think Starfield is going to be appreciated more. In particular, since I don't think Starfield is ever going to get really polished and improved like No Man's Sky has. I think it's going to probably get abandoned and maybe get a tweak here and there just because they're working on the next Elder Scrolls game and it's all on the same engine. But yeah, I think the core limitations of Starfield are going to hold it down and keep it as a mediocre game at best. Then they have a video for WWE 2K26. Some of those were redundant things. Alright, well, I'm going to take my first bathroom break, so I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. You may have noticed that increasingly I'm calling these like first bathroom breaks instead of just a bathroom break because it is consistently now becoming 2 or 3. Let's move on through the Gematsu articles now. Game called Beyond Words launches April 9th. The demo is currently available. Looks like it's a Scrabble, maybe Balatro inspired Scrabble type game. Gothic Classic is coming to iOS in 2026. It's currently already available for the Switch. Yeah. Which, yeah, it's not out yet. The remake is not out yet on Steam. That reminds me, yeah, one of the things about my Steam Deck is that while I just got a good deal on a couple of extra controllers, yeah, I don't know how many receivers, like dongles. One, I may already have a dongle somewhere, if not 2 or 3, but 2, I don't know how many can be received via one dongle. So if it is the case you need a Steam Deck dock and you want to have 4 players, then you need a Steam Deck dock that has 4 USB plugs, which most of them don't because they will take one of those PCI Express lanes and convert it into a Ethernet plug instead of a USB plug, at which point you will only have 3 USB plugs. So yeah, or if you just wanted to go wired instead of wireless anyways and save on batteries, then you need 4 USB plugs. But if you want to go wireless, I don't know how many dongles you really need, particularly if you're going to get dongles that plug into other consoles, which, yeah, really don't want to go down the path of getting like a Switch 2 and a PS5 or a PS5 Pro or Xbox Series X just to have all the consoles when I'm not actually going to play any games on all the consoles. That would be pretty crazy. Moving on, Star Wars Galactic Racers physical editions are going to be distributed by PlayOn. I don't follow distributors well enough to know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't think most people would know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I guess it's knowledge. Yeah, here we can see Beyond Worlds on Steam. But it is intriguing how there are like different sections in one of these, like this, because every other puzzle here seems like it is a roguelite in the sense that you have to move the words in directions to touch items, to get gems, get items, things like that. So it may not really be too Balatro related in the first place. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If anything, it's keeping it more interesting as a concept by having different play fields with different rewards. Yeah. So yeah, that's intriguing looking. Whereas Star Wars Galactic Racers is going to appeal to people who really liked that one racer game. Which, yeah, that's kind of the only Star Wars racer game I think that ever was really popular was the Pod Racer from Episode 1 game. And yeah, to me it always just felt like George Lucas or Star Wars in general had just lost the plot by the time pod racing was so heavily promoted and pushed. Yes, there are light speed things, whatever they're called, in the original trilogy. There's some race scenes, sure, but I don't think even that one scene in sequence was supposed to be so impressive or so good that you would have wanted to have a whole separate video game based on it. Of course, Star Wars was really never designed to be based on a video game, and it is kind of surprising that Star Wars never had any kind of like point and click adventures, which that is more in line with what LucasArts was making. So yeah, it's kind of strange that you have Indiana Jones games turned into point and click adventure games, but no Star Wars games turned into point and click adventure games. Which even now, if they were to make a Star Wars point and click adventure games based on the original series, that might be really interesting. Almost certainly there was some kind of parody Star Wars point and click adventure game. But no, they were so focused on the TIE Fighter space fighting simulation games that there was no real focus on any of the characters or the narrative, which really are more what I think people like Star Wars for, is the robots, the characters, the narrative, things like that. And that is often missing from early Star Wars games and even later Star Wars games. I don't know why Geonosia is being listed here again. You can see it's rated very positively. It's a visual novel with time travel. It does support English. It's being compared to the Nonary games and Danganronpa, both series that I have spent some time playing. Then I imagine Resident Evil Requiem was just mentioned. 96% positive still. Doing really, really good. Possibly one of the highest rated games if you were to try to balance it out with some kind of algorithm based on the number of reviews. Because, yeah, inherently, I guess if you took the entirety of the Steam database, which really only Valve could do this, and then you sorted everything based on the percentage of positive reviews, and then anything that was 96% positive that had like 80,298 user reviews would be below, and everything above 80,300 user reviews would be above. I guess you could certainly do it that way, although it might very well be the case too that you could just ignore all the negative reviews and count only the positive reviews and make a list just based on the total number of positive reviews. That might give you a different chart that's just as equally valid. Of course, that is still going to have a huge bias towards big AAA games, where small games might very well be rated better, or might actually be better in most people's opinions. There just would be fewer people that actually played the game to have an opinion on it. Got a game here called Prism 2033, which feels like it is just a total garbage asset flip MMO. Yeah, it's an MMO, English and Chinese, coming soon. And it does just look like absolute random nonsense. It's a great example of why you need a consistent theme. Something easily recognizable, something that makes sense. You can't have giant muscle men of some sort in one screenshot and then robots and what looks like maybe a Oni demon or at least somebody in an Oni mask, and then looks kind of like a mage in the next shot. Then you have Tomb Raider and a Stargate in the next shot. This all just screams random nonsense, cyberpunk type stuff in the next shot. And yeah, it does just feel like it's AI garbage. And we know there is some AI being put in it too. And sadly, it is the case that Chinese games get the brunt of this kind of criticism because it's usually Chinese language supported games that are typically the offenders of that kind of ridiculous asset flipping, I guess is what you'd still call it. Broken lore follow. Looks kind of like we're just looking at games. Did we screw up here? I wonder, is it possible that in my resetting of my computer, my macro was not running? Or in knocking the HDMI cord loose, is it possible that my macro stops running? Or it could be any other reasons why my macro might have broken. If that's the case, then we really are just looking at new games that kind of would have come out on Steam, but this isn't particularly a new game that's come out on Steam. Do I really want to put this on the follow list? I ask myself. Say not really, but I'll make a YouTube short on it. Fish Stick Protocol. It's a funny name. It's already on my follow list. That's an online co-op game, so I don't know why I would have had it on the follow list in the first place. We have a card game from 2024. Retail Company Simulator. Yep. This is increasingly, I think, the type of game that's going to fall under a growing category of friend slop games. That is also definitely not what I'm looking to cover or promote if I was going to get into doing co-op stuff. Yeah. I have no idea. So you can see this is like a great example of one I might cover, but also this is an 11-year-old game. And even in this, it's not the greatest of experiences really in co-op. Now, what article would have brought up and mentioned all these old games? It's really what this all is. This very old games. Well, this one in particular is not old. Not that old, but give this a chance. I don't know why this would be on the follow list. I'm gonna have to rethink about this because visually this looks weird, but if it is just like simulating old arcade ticket style games, I might be willing to play it, but it's also not co-op, so yeah. This is one of those rare cases where I could say it would have been better if they did flip some assets and just throw in generic models of actual humanoid people, because this doesn't make any sense to me. But weirdly, it is overwhelmingly positive. So, guess I put that on the wish list. Crimson Desert, just not out yet. Cube Save Us, it's not out yet. A lot of this is coming out just this weekend, which, yeah, I'm not sure exactly when St. Patrick's Day is, but definitely seems like it is pretty soon. And then Easter is pretty soon, and then after that I think it's quiet for a while. And Amazon.com even tried to claim they were having a spring sale, but I don't think anything is really on sale. I don't think I'd really believe spring sales are actual sales. I'll give this Dragon Kitten a chance. I did see somebody suggest getting basically plastic lawn furniture instead of what you might get otherwise, which would be metal or wood. And I can testify that I have a wood bench that has been bleached and dried out in the weather and ruined in a incredibly short number of years, 2-3 years. So yeah, if plastic, recycled HDPE plastic, is the solution there, it's something to think about, although I don't know if I really need any lawn furniture at all. But yeah, anything I put outside that's not in the shade tends to get destroyed pretty quickly, which I guess also points out that I'm hoping that my smart birdhouse and bird bath somehow will be exceptions to that. Guess I can put this on the wish list. Doing some wish list fall list cleanup here, unintentionally, but it helps certainly to see some of these older games and go back and look at them. This one is not in English, though. Yep. Did we just miss all the news stories? We may just have to go back and check it later. They may also just be mixed in. But also, no, it doesn't really make sense, because if I was looking at new games, then only some of these games actually have come out or are coming out in recent times. Most of these games we've been looking at are actually very old. Yeah. Another visual novel game. We're calling it a life sim. And I wouldn't say it looks particularly good. Okay. So now we're back to the Gamatsu articles. That was a weird detour that will probably get explained later. Blue Reflection's 9th anniversary livestream is set for March 27th. Blue Reflection being a Yuri JRPG series, I believe. Yuri being girl on girl, typically young anime girl on young anime girl type romances, although it may not be particularly a main theme of the game even, or even that that much of a romantic relationship as it may just be deep affection / friendship. Although Yuri, I think, pretty much does imply romantic. So yeah, you can see all these Japanese schoolgirls possibly going to an all-girls school. I think there's one series that it's definitely an all-girls school. And then they get transported to a different world. Kind of like Persona. But yeah, if the Blue Reflection series is the game I'm thinking about, it is worth pointing out that there are only a couple series like that, when there's definitely room for more series of, or video games in general, just depicting alternative lifestyles, if that's even a politically correct way of phrasing it, as far as gay romances go. Moving on, Resident Evil Requiem sales have topped 6 million. That's clearly the big news that people want to talk about. Yeah, Genosia is available for iOS and Android. That's why we saw that. A futuristic parallel universe MMORPG, Prism 2033, has been announced for PC, iOS, and Android. So, this is a great example of where Gamatsu in particular will just put out any press release they're given. It seems, at least, that's the case. And it's a great example of where, if you want to sell your game, even if it does look like an asset flip garbage game, you should make at least a few press releases and send them out and get people talking about it. Particularly in this day and age of AI articles, like, you might very well submit a press release to a video game site that is run almost completely by AI and have AI write a review of your game that is completely based on the press release, and that will still get you more links and clicks, and maybe you wouldn't want to knowingly be associated with that, but you're almost certainly going to be associated with some kind of AI articles talking about your game anyways, whether you encourage it or not. But yeah, it is shocking how many game developers out there just are almost completely radio silent about their games. They're not really reaching out to people, not even friends and family, to promote and talk about their games. And then they just shove it out on Steam and are expecting it to be a huge success. And then I imagine they're shocked when it isn't a huge success. It's not super surprising, though, too, because if you are a computer programmer, you probably don't have the mindsets and the brains for business to understand humans and advertising and things like that, and you almost certainly do need to deal with somebody else, and that's why the publishing system works so much in the game industry. I don't know if it works well, but it works. It gets used. But yeah, you really just cannot be radio silent when developing and trying to promote your game. You really have to talk to as many people as possible and talk nicely to as many people as possible to get them on your side and turn them into your cheerleaders who will advocate for your game and promote your game as much as you possibly can. In fact, you should be bending over backwards for that. Another thing, certainly, about indie game developers is don't really, if you happen to have any computer science degrees, don't really think that that means much, because it probably is as much a hindrance as it is a help. Because the narrative in most gamers' minds is that when an indie game is being made, it's being made by somebody who barely has any computer programming credentials as far as going to a college and getting a degree, and a computer science degree from any random college is probably going to be pretty useless towards actually developing a game that's good. What they teach in college is just too old, and it's often just the wrong things anyways. Usually those computer science classes are more about teaching you how to work on really old databases or really old accounting software that inside of a corporation. It's not really designed to teach you much of anything. It is sadly the case that most colleges are really just stealing your money and tricking you into thinking you're getting something as far as valuable information, particularly now with the internet. Like, you can just learn computer programming and game development online for free and have more up-to-date, more accurate information. Unfortunately, many jobs, if you want to work for a corporation and not be your own boss and be an indie game developer, require not only college degrees but often many certifications, which are also usually pretty useless but unfortunately necessary. So yeah, if you are an indie developer, you sell yourself as an indie developer a lot more by having demos and having smaller game jam type games or games you've created in the past in general as a portfolio. Game development is much more of an artistic thing, and having an arts degree in any other case is considered pretty useless, but having an art portfolio can be very useful. So yeah, that's a side ramble I had here. Wanted to say out loud. Moving on, Fate/Extra Record has been delayed to an unannounced date, and the publisher's changed. It's no longer due out this spring or going to be published by Bandai Namco. That seems very weird that Bandai Namco would no longer be the publisher. Yeah. I don't know what else to really say about that, but it might imply that perhaps the Fate series is starting to lose some of its rabid fan base. Or maybe it has something to do with a disagreement between Type Moon and Bandai Namco. That might be the case too. Yeah. Let's see, we have this week's Japanese game releases: Crimson Desert, Rushing Beat X, Return of Brawl Brothers, and more. These are more than likely all the games that were opening up on Steam. Was just this entire list here, many of which probably are older games that are coming just to Japan for the first time. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah. Perhaps I need to write some better code so it doesn't open up these links, but it was actually fairly helpful to go back and look at those games. Also highlights a thing where there's a decent number of old games that are being released in Japan, possibly because it took that long to get a Japanese language translation. Moving on, Zoneless Zen 0 version 2.7 update Champions Never Fall to the Past launches March 24th. Okay. Oh. Whole bunch of videos and things to announce all that. And then Broken Lore Follow launches June 1st for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. is the last Gematsu article for today. That'll bring us to gaming on Linux. Rydo is replacing some of its AI voices. The CEO says a real professional actor is better than AI. I think that is something I can agree with. I imagine they might have also been getting some pushback or just realizing that the AI voice is pretty bad. One analyst apparently was quoted as saying that a shockingly low number of people are embracing AI in the game development industry, which, yeah, investment analysts obviously want people to invest in AI because it's the new hotness and the new way to further inflate a extremely made up and inflated stock market and increase the values on companies based on fiction and hope. Whereas any stock market analyst is going to have some real gumption and fortitude to come out and say we're living in a bubble and the bubble needs to burst and the stock market needs to better reflect not only the actual values of companies based on actually realistic accounting, but also it needs to better reflect the real economics of the people of a country, particularly the United States, if it's the New York stock market and the Dow, where less than half of the citizens in the US have anything invested in the stock market, and if they do, more than often they don't know what they have invested and where, and they're not really controlling the money, and they're not voting at the annual meetings. There's a whole thing about proxy votes too, certainly, in that if you get a proxy vote digitally these days, it's only going to have the things that the board approves to be voted on there. So if anybody actually at the meeting brings up a vote, then only the other people at that meeting could vote for or against that, which increases the odds of somebody bringing something up for vote and it not passing. Of course, very few people have the time and or money to actually go to shareholders meetings in person. Yeah. And most of the other people in those meetings are going to only want their money to be increased and not really care about the next quarter or the quarter after that. Moving on, you can team up with your friends in Multiplayer Madness 2026 Humble Bundle. Let's see what games are being shown here. For Monday, it feels like it was kind of a holiday weekend. We don't have too much really as far as gaming on Linux articles, it seems, either. So Shotgun Farmers, Phantom Squad, Fish Stick Protocol, Rune Gore, Retail Company Simulator, Clone Drone, Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes is about the only game there that actually interested me. I closed, I think, all the other games there in that list. OpenRaiser version 3.12.0 brings Linux support for more Razer devices. Nice, I suppose, if you really want to get your LED on, which is, I think, pretty much all this is really doing. I'd be shocked if there were Razer devices that did not work at all by default when you plugged them into a Linux operating system. Hollow Knight Silksong Patch 5 brings many more bug fixes and improved translations. That creates a weird situation, certainly, where people have probably already played Silksong all the way through at this point, and you're still getting patches that would fix the overall experience. Although there's also Sea of Sorrow DLC that's not arrived yet, so people might come back for that and have a better experience. And then by the time I potentially got to playing Hollow Knight Silksong, I would see myself probably buying a deluxe edition that would have as many patches as it's ever going to get. Like Manjaro Linux looks like it's in trouble with the release of Manjaro 2.0 Manifesto. At one point it seemed like Manjaro Linux would be the most popular Arch-based distribution, but after many missteps it appears to be at a breaking point. By now most people in the Linux sphere will have seen the issues, like how they repeatedly let their SSL certificate expire, bringing their entire website down. Sometimes that is easily solved, but shows how the structure behind Manjaro is not particularly stable. On the Manjaro Linux official forum, the team have put up a Manjaro 2.0 manifesto with backing from multiple developers and people on their community team. They say that the leadership behind Manjaro does not line up with the actual developers and community involved in it, noting that Manjaro has become one individual's personal project and everything is centralized around this single individual, the founder, Philip Mueller, and how the attempts to turn it into a business have mostly failed, and so they want to see big changes. So, yeah. Standard, unfortunately, it happens far too often. This becomes the standard Linux experience of one person being in charge and then a lot of other people not wanting them to be in charge, which is another great example of where a programmer is very different from a manager, and you probably would do well to have a manager. And it's an interesting thing because Linus Torvalds is perhaps the only person who has been an example of somebody who actually can program to some level and manage the Linux kernel, whereas every other project, it's usually one or the other. I'd say usually it's the programmer. Let's see. So the quote here is, the Manjaro project has been declining over the past decade. It's managed to sustain a sizable user base, yet it's stagnated, lost trust, and lost almost all of its contributors, and even become a laughingstock for repeatedly making the same mistakes and never even attempting to address these known issues. So what do they want? They want to split off Manjaro into two distinct entities, a company behind Manjaro, Manjaro GmbH and Co. KG, and a new non-profit registered association, EV, along with lots of the project being transferred over to the non-profit org. So yeah, they're trying to do a full-on split, and I'm sure the Philip Mueller feels like they're trying to steal his baby, and in all rightfulness, they are trying to steal his baby. At a certain level, if this is all open source code, there's really not a big reason to have to go through all this. They could just fork the project. I'm sure there's plenty of forks of Manjaro that already exist. There's value that this group sees in the name and the non-profit existing under that name. Going by the latest updates, they say the Manjaro founder, Philip Mueller, is currently stalling things, and so all those in favor of the proposal appear to be going on some sort of strike, and they may be looking to lock the entire official forum down until they get Mueller on board. Manjaro has been pretty messy for years, so it's nice to see that some of their team and community are attempting to rebuild things with a stronger foundation. I imagine that there is just a whole third faction of people that have forked Manjaro and moved to a different distro of Linux. And at some point we may just get to a point where Linux distros just don't matter that much. Right now there's certainly dangers of similar things happening to CachyOS or Bazelite. I don't have any real story saying that that would happen, but the problem here is the humans. And I guess if AI was actually good at telling the truth or good at programming, at some point these kinds of distros may be 99% maintained and run by AI, and then the humans won't be as involved. Although I imagine they still would have some input that would lead to some drama. Linux drama happens fairly frequently and usually for somewhat decent reasons. But it is something you certainly don't see behind the likes of closed source operating systems like Mac OS or Windows. I'm sure that drama does happen, but it's just handled internally by HR or by the bosses picking one side versus the other. Moving on, the Proton Experimental has brought fixes for the Red Launcher, Helldivers 2, Atelier Lumia, Killer N, and more. So we continue to see Proton picking games to improve upon, and it still seems to be weirdly varied games that they're working on, but mostly somewhat recognizable big name games. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if there's just a minimal number of sales that a game has to have on Steam before they would actually bother to try and get it to run on Proton. That'll bring us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. So, the GDC Festival of Gaming 2026 delivers 5 days of transformative connection and insight for an industry in transition. This is basically a recap, I think, of what happened at the GDC Festival of Gaming. I think it has already happened. Let's see. Claire Obscure has secured top honors at the Game Developers Choice Awards. I assume that is an award show inside GDC. Yeah. I don't know why we have this still showing up there. Guess this is a advertisement that they've tagged in. Let's see. Unionized game workers launch a petition to protect immigrants from ICE agents. The We Don't Play with ICE campaign is demanding employers commit to being a Fourth Amendment workplace. Fourth Amendment? Is that unlawful search and seizure? There's asking employers to avoid collaborating or cooperating with any federal or local law enforcement unless explicitly compelled by a judicial warrant signed by a judge. Which, honestly, is not that big of an ask. It should be the case always. Unfortunately, I think it probably is the case that somebody at the door, the guards, are going to just let ICE or anybody in if they're waving guns and badges around. I definitely heard of one story where ICE agents came in on one premise and said one thing, and then as soon as they got in, just started arresting people. So, yeah. Getting everybody on board by petition might be somewhat helpful, but it probably is just a tempest in a teapot overall, and it's not going to accomplish too much. And it might very well be a case where it would have been better for the union members to focus on just themselves and keep their head down and not delve into something that might be seen as more political. Inherently, these unions would almost certainly not want members that were illegal aliens in the United States as their own members. So, inherently, I don't know how much the unions would even support or protect illegal immigrants from just being harassed or laid off or fired by management in a union game company. And I think it's probably pretty much the case that everybody who's actually working at the game company is probably not an immigrant anyways. You just don't see a lot of video game developers coming illegally to the United States to work in that industry. Maybe you could say maybe some of the contractors and accessory people like the cleaners and janitors might be illegal immigrants, but that's about it. So it's probably a case where they figured this petition doesn't hurt, but it also probably doesn't do anything. And I would say that this kind of action sadly reflects some of the armchair activism that we've seen with social justice warrior types in the past, where they want to make a imaginary character female when they were previously male, or they want to make a previously attractive female character less attractive. I mean, it's not really doing much for the real world and society to do any of those things at all. Maybe it gets one more female voice actor a role. Maybe it instills some kind of preference in society, but probably not as far as making characters less attractive. Inherently, when you look at the Oscars and movies in general, those people are attractive. It has always been the case. Go back to the Mona Lisa even. I mean, even the Mona Lisa is considered to be an attractive, beautiful person. The paintings of hideous, ugly people very rarely were made in the first place, and if they were, they definitely aren't talked about that much, or shown that much. Human beings, male and female, just prefer that when they are being shown forms of art, that it is visually attractive in most cases, that the humans are visually attractive. That's just human nature that almost certainly will not be overcome based on propagandizing or normality, for lack of a better term. Let's move on. A direct join union, the UVWCWA, now has 550 members. The union can be joined by video game workers based in the United States and Canada. Interesting. So you join it, and what, then you have to pay dues, or do you have any possibility of getting a pension or health care by being a member of this union? Like, what is the union really doing for you in this case, if anybody can join it? Let's see. UVWCWA differs from a shop floor union in that it's open to all video game workers based in the United States and Canada, not limited by the constraints of a certification process. They're working on putting together a video game worker bill of rights to protect the well-being of all workers in the industry. So inherently, I feel like a union like this is going to push you to go on strike against certain companies for the benefit of that smaller subset of members that actually work at that company. The sad thing, and one of the things that has prevented unionization up until this point, is your average team gets too big when developing games when you have slightly over 30 people. So like a union shop, a single company that gets unionized would just be 30 people or so. So potentially, if they were trying to get some kind of union contract with one company, then you're asking over 550 people to go on strike against a company to support 30 people. And yes, that's solidarity, and yes, the thought there is that a rising tide will lift all boats, but it does feel like you're being asked quite a lot for a promise of very little. You are paying dues to join this union, as it were, and so what does that money really get you? I don't think it gets you anything. I don't think it gets you closer to having a pension, which most game developers would really benefit by having a pension. I don't think it gives you health insurance, life insurance, and because none of these unions are going to be officially recognized at the moment by your company, it doesn't give you any real right of representation or arbitration if you were to be fired from a union job. And yeah, your rights as a union member are going to drastically vary in the United States based on what state you're in. So yeah, I wouldn't inherently recommend joining this union unless you just really want to support it, because you're going to be paying union dues. There might be some tax reasons why paying union dues might be a decent write-off, but I bet it's not that good of a tax write-off. I wouldn't be surprised in the United States if there actually are no write-offs for paying union dues at all. Moving on, Lightspeed Studio unveils a proprietary development frame to build titles rooted in reality. Okay. So, this is the PUBG mobile co-developer making yet another framework / game engine from the looks of it. Alright, and that will bring us to all the new games on Steam now, and let me just adjust myself in the chair as I'm just sinking deeper and deeper into a slump. Yeah. Briefly considered getting a weightlifting chair as a chair, just because I know it would be sturdy, but nah, that's kind of crazy. Yeah. But I probably do need more back support in the chair I'm in. It just doesn't lean forward enough. I was also trying to find out if anybody makes pre-made platforms for theater rooms where you could set a sofa up a few inches higher, so you could have rows of sofa. And as far as I can tell, not really. I mean, you could get pallets, and that's probably your smartest move, to put them up on pallets, but I think realistically you're going to have to just have a custom built floor, extra built, to do something like that. Alright, let's go through all the new games on Steam. So, the standard way in which things are done are if I am uninterested in the game, I'm just going to close it by swiping down like that. That's what you're going to see for the most part. If I think it deserves a YouTube short, I'm going to at least pretend to make a YouTube short by swiping this way and leaving the tab open. If I am really interested in it, I will put it on the follow list to evaluate it later further, which in general that means look to see if it is mostly positive and has over 30 user reviews and is not in early access. Yeah. We'll see if over this weekend there's anything new and exciting. Yep. So far, nothing wrong. Typically there is very little that is new and exciting. There might be something here. And I think that idea of a point and click Star Wars is really interesting, but you couldn't actually do it unless you had licensed the Star Wars, so only Disney could really do it unless Star Wars went into public domain. That won't happen, I think, for decades. And almost certainly there is some kind of parody. Space Quest is probably a close parody to Star Wars like point and clicks out there. It is so crazy how these streaming days go for me, and that I'm trying to wake up somewhat early, and then I do these streams, and then for the most part that is it for the entire day. Just not likely to do anything else, otherwise I would overexhaust myself. Oh, I guess that's an interesting thought. What if there was a game on Steam built around managing and playing your Steam library? Interesting. You probably couldn't give achievements for getting achievements in other games. Could possibly pull up the how long to beat list around your game, playing other games. Yeah, what would be the actual gameplay mechanic would be my question. If it was a game based around looking at your other games, could be something about organizing your library and having more sub-organization. Of course, more subcategories doesn't mean you're really that organized. And when you get into organizing things in general, my thought is always you go tall then wide, and then tall then wide, then tall then wide, and that you might have a list of everything that starts with like the letter A, and then everything that is AE or AS would be a vertical banner, So you would scroll down normally for A's, and then you'd have a horizontal, and then if you click on something it might go another thing. That's the best I've ever been able to really explain, and I didn't explain it particularly well there as far as trying to be organized. And once you really are at that level, it's overwhelming. Arguably, even having 100 of anything is overwhelming in any one category. And I think the Steam client does a decent job of depicting and organizing the games I have, but I wouldn't say it's a great job. You know, it almost seemed like if you're going to make a game, it'd probably not be a game, it'd probably be an app. I'll give this a chance, not really for any good reason. But yeah, if you were to have an app that would look at your Steam library, look at the games that you haven't finished, and pull up Twitch streams of that game that are happening at that moment, maybe that would encourage people to play it. And I'd say specifically Twitch streams, because it'd probably be harder to pull up YouTube streams and embed them at that moment. Now weirdly, that might actually give a bunch of people extra Twitch views or YouTube views if you could do that. So that might help small content creators quite a bit. So yeah, I guess maybe what you could do, this is a VR game, but I'm gonna follow it anyways, is have like a roulette wheel that starts off, and you just start spinning the roulette wheel, and from that you're landing on a random game that you haven't marked as finished. You would have a button somewhere that says you can say, I'm not interested in ever playing this game, or I finished this game already. And then if you don't click any of those buttons, it would pull up either a YouTube or a Twitch stream, maybe at random, maybe just the most popular one of that game playing right then and there, and fill in like a single square, and possibly a like 3x3 grid. It might even be a 3x4 grid, and then you just have another roulette wheel spin and it picks another game and starts to stream that. I guess the question is, how many things can you stream from at the same time? It might be that you have to only stream one thing at a time, so maybe you'd have to click on the games before you get the Twitch stream. And maybe you don't get a Twitch stream or YouTube stream at all. Maybe you just click on them and it brings you to a page telling you more about the game. Yeah. Maybe you throw in some idle clicker type concepts too, where you reward the player for the more games that they look at and label. Maybe you have a leaderboard on based on who is actually engaged the most with their games. It definitely feels like it's the kind of concept that could be done relatively quickly, and would be a meme type experience, or maybe not meme, maybe meta is the better term. Yeah, I'd say it's a meta type experience that I think mainstream video game journalists might talk about a lot, as far as here's a game that encourages you to play other games. Give that a chance. This looks like this is definitely an adult game. It should be in the adult section. But yeah, that's another example of a project that could be something, but probably would never get made. I had a whole project as far as project ideas in like a Google form that I never really used myself as a concept. Here we have what looks like another asset flip game. Here we have a game that I would never call an asset flip game just because of the low polygon appearance to it. Yeah, maybe roulette wheel is even the wrong thought there. Maybe you just make straight up a tower defense game. Interesting concept, because then the games themselves could be coming towards your tower, and then whatever game gets past your tower is what's suggested to you. Yeah, I think that concept, although making a tower defense game versus a clicker game, like either one could be not that popular. Almost would make more sense to have different modes. Here is a mini game of clickers where you're playing a clicker game. Here's a mini game where you're playing a tower defense game. I don't know if there's really too many other games you would want to engage with or try to create, though, because it would just be more programming at a certain point. Because yeah, I could see with enough budget and time you can make a whole bunch of WarioWare style mini games that are all jokingly being built around your Steam library. Yeah, you could have like a skeet shot, duck hunt type mini game. Yeah. Yeah, I would want to have at least 3 mini games of some sort based on your Steam library attacking / overwhelming you. Like a poker game based on your Steam games would be hard to visually depict. A mahjong game would be hard to visually depict. A card pack opening game would work really well. As far as, yeah, that's the best one yet. I think it would be really popular. It's just, here's a card pack opening animation that is the games you have already on Steam. Alright, let's look at the file list cleanup. Again, it feels like there's not that many games coming out on Steam. Either my macro is not opening all of them, and I'm just being too lazy to actually double check that, or we are just seeing less getting released on Steam, which that too might be the case. Alright, well, yeah, that is just a shockingly small amount of time to go through all the games on Steam, but I will leave it at that. That's going to be it for this stream, as always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.